In another time, in another place, maybe in another universe, the year is 1985, and a young Bill Watterson has signed a deal with Universal Press Syndicate to publish his much anticipated Calvin and Hobbes strip in newspapers across America. Watterson is a cartooning pioneer, soon developing the Sunday half-page cartoon and making Calvin and Hobbes one of the most popular strips of the late 80s. Due to its rising popularity and media saturation, Watterson sues Universal Press Syndicate to increase his creative control over the licensing, but his notion is struck down later that year in federal court. As a result, Bill Watterson announces his retirement from cartooning. In 1992, now left with all the rights, Universal Press Syndicate releases Hobbes plush toys across North America, and they're soon found in almost every household. And then a deal is struck with Warner Brothers to release 3 seasons of the Calvin and Hobbes animated series, as well as a DC comic book. In 1993, a live-action movie starring Macaulay Culkin is released, but it is panned by audiences and critics. Struggling to maintain its readership, the now infamous cartoon of Calvin riding an elevator upwards through the newspaper into the 4th panel of a Doonesbury strip to find a partially clad Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky was released and gained a fair amount of notoriety. By the end of the 90s, it seems like Calvin and Hobbes might have run its course. But within a decade, and riding a new wave of nostalgia, Universal Press Syndicate, seeking to maximize shareholder value, sold the rights to Calvin and Hobbes to the Disney Corporation for $200 million. In 2007, the Spaceman Spiff and Hobbes Jungle Land rides were built in Disneyland and soon became part of an animated movie franchise. The end. The previous never really happened. I was just trying to provide an example of what would happen if basically Bill Watterson, who created Calvin and Hobbes, was under the same work-for-hire agreement that the major comic companies have with their creative team. So if he had been, yeah, you might have seen, a lot more Calvin and Hobbes merchandising, likely in some animated shows, maybe a live-action movie. Maybe it would have been sold to Disney by now. Who knows? But the thing is, it's not. Mr. Watterson still has full control over his creation because he did it via the newspaper and not via a comic book. So I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and what's the biggest impact to Western comics versus manga? Now, you can go back and say, okay, it was the Comics Code Authority. And yeah, that certainly defined what type of titles, what could be portrayed. But, I mean, to me, the number one factor, the biggest difference, is that back in 1938, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel basically signed that work-for-hire agreement with Detective Comics. So they literally signed over all their ideas, their copyright, their intellectual property to the company. Whereas in Japan, and I'm not saying every single mangaka owns the rights or hasn't done this. Honestly, I don't know, but I know the vast majority of them still own their properties. So if it's going to go to an anime, they have that licensing, right? So they work with studios, of course, and every one has different contracts and yada yada. But the big thing is, when it hits, they get paid. So whereas in America, under the work for hire, somebody the biggest example, Stan Lee, For example, now he did incredibly well in the later years of his life, but you think about what he's done with the characters he's created, like Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, the Incredible Hulk, Black Panther. Just keep going and going. And yes, he became a figurehead for Marvel, but and then even to a lesser degree, like look at Chris Claremont, who wrote the X-Men through the 80s. Like the amount of characters he created as well. And again, I mean, Chris Claremont was paid well, but he'd be much, much better off if he actually retained that intellectual property. But that's not the agreement. In the West, specifically through DC and Marvel, their legacy, intellectual property, it's the company owns it, so they just do whatever they think will make money, whether that's like underoos to bed sheets to action figures to big budget movies to Disneyland rides, right? It's, yeah, totally different. But, here's the thing I've been thinking about a lot is like Western comics, that IP, that intellectual property is getting beat to death. What else can happen to Superman or to Batman, for example? Like, you're literally gone through the whole gamut, and now you're into like gender identity politics and whatnot, because you don't want to repeat what's already happened between, like Superman died, Batman got his back broken, you have Dark Knight Returns, you have so many different things. And the other kicker is the writers don't want to create new characters because they lose the rights to their characters. So they're kind of getting staid and repetitive. And, whereas in Japan, you have, it's once an author hits a point, they're probably going to wrap up the story or just pass away, basically. And then, yes, I guess the rights go to their family, but that basically stops the Berserk, for example. That basically stops the title, unfortunately. So, yeah, it's something there. It's kind of cool. It's one I've been thinking about a lot. And anyway, I just thought I'd put this out with the Calvin and Hobbes example, whereas it literally only ran for 10 years. Because Bill Watterson decided he did everything he wanted to do within the scope of Calvin and Hobbes, and the strip ended. And he's still alive and well, and not, I'm not sure what he's doing, but he's not drawing more Calvin and Hobbes for a daily strip. So there you have it. Anyway, thanks for listening again, everybody, and again, something to consider. There you go. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.